The wind moved like a restless animal through the pines, tugging at branches heavy with early snow, sweeping powder into the air until the world itself seemed to blur. Jackson Boone moved against it, broad shoulders hunched, his breath rising in pale plumes. He was a man who had long ago made peace with silence, with the sharp bite of mountain air and the unbroken stillness of wilderness. His rifle lay across his back, his knife at his hip, but his attention that morning was fixed on the faint tracks of elk threading their way up the ridge. Then he heard it, thin, broken, swallowed by the storm. A sound that did not belong to the forest. He froze, boots sinking into the snow. For a moment he thought at the wind twisting strangely, but then it came again, muffled, weak, a desperate murmur. "Please, open!" His pulse tightened. Slowly he turned, scanning the whitewashed clearing between dark trunks. The sound came again, fainter now, strained as if pressed through cloth. "Cannot breathe." Jackson moved, boots crunching, snow squealing beneath his weight. His eyes, sharp from years of hunting, caught a lump in the drift by a cluster of rocks. It shifted, ever so slightly. He dropped to his knees beside it, gloved hands brushing snow away. A human form emerged, bound cruelly with coarse rope, a rough sack cinched tight over the head. The body trembled weakly, shoulders heaving against the suffocating prison. "God Almighty," he muttered, knife already flashing into his hand. With careful precision, he sawed at the rope until it gave. The sack sagged, and he tore it away, revealing the face beneath. A young woman gasped for air as though surfacing from drowning. Her lips were split, her skin raw where the rope had cut into it. Her dark hair clung damp to her cheeks. Her eyes, almond-shaped, luminous despite their terror, met his, wide and desperate. Her words tumbled out in halting English, each syllable trembling. "Please, cannot breathe." "You're breathing now," Jackson said, voice low but steady, as if his tone alone could anchor her to life. He eased her upright, pressing his coat around her shoulders. Beneath her torn garments she was frail, thin from hunger, yet her hands clutched at his sleeve with astonishing strength. He glanced around the clearing. Whoever had left her here had bound her to die slow, frozen or starved, the sack her final darkness. He saw tracks, boot prints half swallowed by drifting snow, leading back into the trees. His jaw clenched. Men had done this. Not wolves. Not chance. The woman tried to speak again, fragments spilling like broken glass. "Cruel settler. Tide. Left. Forest." Her breath shuddered in clouds. "Save your strength," Jackson murmured. His hand lingered on her back, steadying her trembling frame. Already the cold was creeping into her bones. If he did not act, she would not survive another hour. He gathered her into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, as though winter had already stolen half her substance. Rising, he shifted her carefully against his chest, coat flaring against the storm. She pressed her face into the hollow of his shoulder, the faintest whisper escaping her lips. "Don't leave me." Jackson did not answer, but his arms tightened. The snow thickened, swirling fast. Wolves cried distantly, their voices long and mournful, carried on the gale. He knew he would not reach his cabin before nightfall, not with her fading in his hold. He angled toward a hollow of rock he remembered from hunts past, a place where stone leaned against stone to form a narrow shelter. Each step dragged. The woman stirred faintly, then fell limp again, her breath shallow. Jackson's mind sharpened to a singular point: keep her alive. The rest, the tracks, the cruelty, the question of who she was, could wait. He ducked beneath the stone arch into the hollow, setting her gently on the ground. The wind screamed outside, but here it dulled to a whistle. He dropped his pack, tore out flint, and within minutes had coaxed a flame to life. Dry sticks caught, then thicker logs. The fire threw trembling light across the stone, warming the bitter air. He crouched, tugging the frozen knots from her wrists. The rope had bitten so deep it left red welts ridged into her skin. She winced but did not pull away, her eyes fluttering open to watch him. There was fear there still, but also something else. Confusion, maybe, that this stranger's touch was not cruel. He drew his canteen, lifted it to her lips. "Slow," he murmured. She obeyed, water dribbling down her chin. When she coughed he steadied her, one broad palm against her back. Her gaze fixed on him, unblinking. "Why help?" Jackson considered, then answered simply, "Because no one else did." The fire cracked. Shadows stretched up the stone walls. She curled near the warmth, shivering less now, eyes drifting shut. But even in half-sleep her hand crept toward him, fingers brushing the edge of his coat as if to make certain he had not vanished. He watched her, expression unreadable, though inside something stirred he had not felt in years. He had lived too long with only the mountains for company. His voice seldom used except to mutter to the wind. Yet here was this woman, broken by others' cruelty, breathing because of him. A fragile thread now tied them together. Hours passed. He fed the fire, wrapped his blanket around her, listened to the storm rage itself into exhaustion. From time to time she murmured in a tongue he did not know, soft syllables that sounded like prayer or memory. Once she whispered, "May," so faintly he almost missed it. "May," he repeated under his breath, testing the shape of it. She stirred, but did not wake. The night deepened. Beyond the hollow, snow piled higher, masking tracks, swallowing the world. The wolves howled again, closer now, their hunger sharp. Jackson shifted, rifle across his knees, his gaze never straying far from her sleeping face. When dawn finally bled gray through the trees, he rose stiffly, stepped outside, and scanned the clearing. The storm had quieted, leaving the world ghost-pale and still. Yet his eyes caught what he feared, a broken branch, a line of disturbed snow not far from the hollow. Not wolf. Not elk. Boots. Someone had come close in the night. Someone had listened, maybe watched. He returned inside, jaw tight. May lay curled near the fire, breath steady, color beginning to return to her cheeks. He knelt beside her, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. She looked fragile still, yet alive. Alive because fate had set him on this path, because he had heard her voice through the storm. She shifted, eyes blinking open. For a moment she looked at him not with fear, but with something like trust. Her lips parted, and in the faintest whisper she said, "Forever." Jackson froze, the word echoing strangely in his chest. He had spoken nothing of forever, not aloud. Perhaps she had only dreamed, or perhaps she had heard the vow he muttered hours before when he promised the firelight he would keep her breathing. Outside, the forest seemed to hold its breath. The boot marks still fresh in the snow told him the cruel hands that had left her to die might not be done. He reached for his rifle, eyes narrowing at the mouth of the hollow where pale daylight spilled. Somewhere in that silence lay the promise of danger, waiting. And as he listened to her fragile breathing steady beside the fire, Jackson knew this was no chance rescue. It was the beginning of a fight. The snow had not let up by the time Jackson carried her into the valley. The storm had thinned into a pale hush, flakes drifting like ash through the morning air, but the cold cut deeper than knives. May lay against his chest, half-conscious, her breath rising in uneven patterns. He tightened his hold as his cabin came into view, a lonely structure crouched against a slope of pine and stone, smoke curling faintly from the chimney as if the place itself exhaled warmth. He pushed the door open with his shoulder, ducking inside. The room smelled of pine pitch, smoke, and leather. It was no grand dwelling, only a single room built from squared logs, but it was sturdy, lined with shelves of dried roots and venison, his tools stacked neatly in corners. He crossed to the bed, a narrow frame of wood covered by pelts, and laid her gently upon it. For a moment he stood over her, chest rising and falling, watching the faint color in her face deepen from ashen gray to a warmer hue under the flicker of the hearth. Her eyes opened, disoriented, taking in the rafters overhead, the crackle of fire, the figure of the man beside her. Her lips trembled with words that did not form. "You're safe here," Jackson said. His voice was low, gravel-worn by silence, but steady as stone. He knelt, unwrapping his coat from her shoulders. "Rest now." She did not answer, but her hand gripped the blanket as if to anchor herself to reality. He moved to the fire, set fresh logs to burn, and filled a pot with snow from a bucket near the door. As the water melted, he dropped in venison strips, onions, and a pinch of salt. The cabin filled slowly with the scent of broth, something hearty, grounding. When he turned back, she was watching him. Not with suspicion, not quite with trust either, only with the deep bewilderment of one pulled from death into a stranger's keeping. Her gaze lingered on the scar down his jaw, the gray threaded into his dark beard, the breadth of his frame. He caught her staring, but did not comment, only ladled stew into a tin cup and brought it to her bedside. "Eat," he said, pressing it into her hands. She raised it shakily, sipping slow. The warmth spread color into her face, the steam curling against her lashes. Her throat moved with each swallow. When she set the cup down, her eyes glistened, not just from the heat, but from something heavier. Jackson shifted, uncertain. He was not a man given to speech. Yet in her silence he felt an odd kinship, as though the quiet between them was a shared language. Hours passed. Outside, snow lay thick on the pines, muffling the world. Inside, time slowed into the rhythm of necessity. He split wood, each strike echoing through the cabin, while she sat near the fire, her hands folded in her lap. She seemed to draw comfort from the sound, as though it meant he remained close. When she dozed, he watched the way her breath steadied, her brow smoothing from its earlier tension. When she woke, she touched the blanket with careful fingers, as though not yet convinced it was hers to use. That night, he spread a blanket on the floor for himself. She glanced at him, startled by the gesture, but he only shrugged. "The bed's yours," he said, lying down with his back to the fire. The silence that followed was softer than words. In the days that followed, a rhythm began to take shape, fragile as ice but steady. She helped in small ways, mending a torn shirt with fine stitches, arranging kindling, washing tin cups with melted snow. Each act was hesitant at first, but grew surer as she realized he would not scold her, would not strike. Jackson moved about his work as though her presence were no burden, never asking for more, never crowding her. One morning she whispered, "Thank you." The words were quiet, but to him they struck like thunder. He only nodded, not trusting himself to answer. As the snow deepened, they learned one another in silence. She noticed the care with which he sharpened his blade, every motion deliberate. He noticed the way she hummed under her breath while sewing, the tune strange yet soothing, filling the cabin with a fragile life. She startled easily when the wind slammed the shutters, her shoulders jerking, her eyes wide. He did not speak then. He only shifted closer, splitting logs louder, letting the sound of work reassure her. Their gazes met often. At first she would look away quickly, ashamed or afraid. But gradually her eyes lingered longer, drawn by something she could not name. His own gaze held steady, unreadable, though once she saw his hand tighten around the handle of his cup when she smiled faintly at the fire. There was no need for declarations. The bond forming was quieter than that, shaped by gestures, by the shared warmth of soup, by the firelight reflecting in two pairs of eyes. Yet beneath the peace, Jackson carried tension like a hidden blade. At night he checked the door twice, kept his rifle propped by the wall within reach. He remembered the boot tracks outside the hollow. Someone had followed. Someone might return. One evening, as twilight dimmed the world into indigo, he stepped outside to split more wood. The valley lay hushed beneath snow, the trees skeletal against the sky. Then he heard it, distant, faint, but unmistakable, the thud of hooves. His grip tightened on the axe. The sound faded quickly, swallowed by the woods, but it was enough to knot his chest. He carried the wood inside, face unreadable. May looked up, sensing something, though he said nothing. He only set the axe aside, stoked the fire, and laid another blanket across her shoulders. She touched the fabric, then his hand, ever so lightly, as if asking what he would not say. His eyes met hers, and though no words passed, she understood. Danger lingered near. That night, she dreamed again, murmuring in her language. Jackson lay awake on the floor, listening, trying to catch fragments. He caught only one word, repeated with aching softness. Home. His chest tightened. He had not thought of his own cabin as home in years. It had been only shelter, solitude, a place to outlast winters. But when she whispered it, he felt the word take root. The days grew colder. Snow climbed higher against the walls. Their survival depended now on wood, on careful rations, on vigilance. Yet within the small cabin, warmth bloomed in ways Jackson had not expected. He found himself watching her reflection in the kettle, the curve of her cheek outlined by firelight. He scolded himself silently for it, but could not help it. One evening, while she sewed by the fire, she spoke suddenly, her voice tentative but clear. "Your name." He paused, surprised, then answered, "Jackson." She repeated it, softly, shaping the syllables with care. He realized he had not heard his name spoken aloud in weeks. It startled him more than the cry in the forest had. She lowered her gaze, fingers working the needle, then whispered, "May." He already knew it, but hearing her offer it to him directly made something shift between them. He nodded once. "May." The fire cracked. For the first time, her lips curved upward, not a full smile, but the faintest lift, fragile and brave. Jackson looked away quickly, afraid of how much it stirred within him. That night, when the wind rattled the shutters and she startled, he rose silently, placing another log in the fire, his presence steady. She watched him, eyes wide, and whispered again, "Thank you." The bond between them was no longer mere survival. It was beginning to be something else, something neither had yet named. The snow outside deepened into silence. Inside, the warmth grew. Yet Jackson's instincts never rested. Each night he scanned the tree line before barring the door. Each night he touched the rifle to be sure it was within reach. For though the cabin had become a fragile sanctuary, he knew sanctuaries were always temporary in a land where cruelty hunted freely. One evening, as the fire burned low, the quiet between them shifted. May set aside her sewing, hands folded, eyes on him. "Why?" she asked softly. He looked at her, brow furrowed. "Why you help me," she clarified, her voice shaking with both gratitude and fear. He hesitated, then said, "Because no one else would." Her eyes filled, though no tears fell. She reached for the cup he had given her, but her hands trembled. He rose, knelt beside her, steadying it. Their fingers brushed. Neither moved for a long moment. The fire snapped. Outside, the wind moaned through the pines. May drew in a breath, her voice a whisper barely carried. "Then I stay." Jackson's chest tightened, but he only nodded once, slowly. The flames threw their shadows long across the walls, binding them together in flickering light. And yet, as he laid his blanket on the floor that night, Jackson caught it again, the faint, distant echo of hooves through snow, carried on the still air. He lay awake, eyes open to the rafters, knowing with grim certainty that whatever cruel hands had bound May and left her to die had not yet released their claim. The sound faded, but the echo lingered, a reminder that the peace inside the cabin was fragile as glass, waiting for the first stone to be thrown. The days folded into one another, stitched together by snow and silence. Jackson kept the cabin warm, his every action deliberate, while May grew steadier, her color returning. She moved with care, still startled by sudden noises, still cautious of the world around her, but no longer clinging to the edge of collapse. Each morning, when she opened her eyes and found him there by the fire, she breathed a little easier. For Jackson, the sight of her rising from the shadow of death gave the cabin a life he had not known in years. Yet beneath the comfort, he felt the storm of unspoken truths waiting to break. It came slowly at first, in fragments. She sat by the fire, mending one of his shirts, the needle flashing in and out. Her hands were deft, though the knuckles bore faint scars. She spoke without lifting her gaze. "You want to know," she said, voice hushed. He did not press, but he stopped sharpening his knife, letting the silence invite her forward. "My name Mei Lin," she whispered, the words like a confession. "I come from Guangdong. My father, he sent me across the ocean. Said work here, send money home. Said America, promise." Her throat tightened on the last word. Jackson said nothing, only watched the firelight tremble across her face. "They lied," she continued, voice quivering. "No work for me. They sell. To a man. Settler." Her hand jerked, the needle pricking her finger, a drop of red welling. She pressed it quickly to her lips, but her eyes had gone distant. "His name Crane," Jedediah Crane. Cruel. The name settled heavy in the air, like smoke that refused to clear. Jackson had heard it before. In the mining camps men spoke of Crane, ruthless in trade, feared by those weaker than him, quick with a whip or pistol. A man who treated others as possessions, not souls. Jackson's jaw tightened, but he let her speak. He beat those who not obey, May said. He laugh at me when I fight. Tied sack on my head. Said wolves eat me. Said no one care. Her voice cracked, and for a moment she seemed to fold in on herself, shoulders trembling as though the memory still bound her throat. Jackson leaned forward, voice rough but steady. But someone did care. I heard you. She looked at him then, eyes glistening, her mouth opening as if to speak more, but the words broke. She turned back to the shirt, forcing her hands to keep sewing though the fabric shook between her fingers. Jackson returned to his knife, drawing the whetstone slowly, each rasping stroke a promise he did not yet voice. That night, May dreamed again. She thrashed, whispering in her own tongue, clutching at the blanket as though drowning. Jackson rose from the floor and knelt beside her, his hand resting near but not upon her, unwilling to startle her further. When she woke with a cry, eyes wide and full of terror, he spoke low. It's over. He's not here. Her breathing slowed as she recognized him, her gaze fixing on the scar along his jaw, the steadiness of his eyes. She whispered, Why you save me? You don't know me. Jackson hesitated. The truth was simple, but not easy to speak. At last he said, I know enough. I know you didn't deserve the sack. That's all I need. Her lips trembled, but she gave no answer. She lay back down, and though she did not touch him, her hand rested on the edge of the blanket as if she might. The next morning, while Jackson was hauling wood inside, a figure appeared at the edge of the clearing. It was Samuel Briggs, an old trapper, his beard frosted, his eyes sharp as crows. He raised a hand in greeting but did not step closer until Jackson lowered the axe. Boone, Briggs called. Heard you been keepin' company. His gaze flicked past Jackson to the cabin door, suspicion plain. Jackson's stance stiffened. What of it? Briggs spat into the snow. Word in the camps is Crane's lost something. Says a woman slipped from him. He's been sendin' his men through these hills, askin questions. Rough questions. Jackson's jaw clenched. Crane won't find her. Briggs studied him, eyes narrowing. Ain't my place to judge. But you know what that bastard's capable of. You take her in, you take his wrath too. Jackson stepped closer, his height casting Briggs in shadow. She stays. The trapper held his gaze a moment, then grunted. Reckon you always had a stubborn streak. Just watch yourself. The man don't forgive. He turned and disappeared back into the trees, leaving Jackson with the wind and the weight of certainty. Inside, May had heard enough. She stood near the fire, arms wrapped tight around herself. He look for me, she whispered. Jackson closed the door firmly, barring it. Let him look. He won't take you. She shook her head, eyes brimming with tears. If they come, they kill you. I bring death to your door. You didn't bring it, he said. They did. His voice was harder than he meant, but his gaze softened when he met hers. And I've faced worse storms than Crane. Still she looked away, ashamed. That night she said little, retreating into silence. Jackson gave her space, but in the dark, he heard her weep quietly, her sobs muffled by the blanket. He lay awake, his chest tight, fists clenched against the urge to reach for her hand. The days grew sharper, the cold cutting like glass. Jackson prepared. He cut more wood than usual, set traps near the tree lean, cleaned his rifle twice over. May noticed. She watched him with worried eyes as he checked the door, as he stood long at the window scanning the whiteness. She began to help in her own way, keeping the fire tended, drying meat, arranging their supplies with careful hands. She moved with quiet determination, as though earning her place, though Jackson had never asked it. One afternoon, while she sewed by the fire, she broke the silence. I can leave, she said softly. Go far. They not find me. You safe. Jackson set down the blade he had been honing. His voice was firm. You're not leaving. Not to freeze. Not to starve. Not while I draw breath. She stared at him, lips parted, as if she could not quite believe anyone would speak so. A tear slid down her cheek, but she brushed it away quickly, returning to her work. That night, something shifted. She placed the finished shirt by his side of the fire, folded neatly. Yours, she whispered. He lifted it, running his rough hand over the careful stitches. Thank you, he said. His voice cracked faintly on the words, and she heard it. Their eyes met across the firelight, and for a moment neither looked away. The snow outside muffled all sound, but Jackson's instincts did not rest. He dreamed of footsteps circling the cabin, of shadows pressing against the walls. He woke with his hand on the rifle, heart pounding. Beside the fire, May stirred, whispering his name in her sleep. It startled him, the first time she had spoken it. Morning brought little comfort. While checking his traps near the creek, Jackson found hoofprints again, fresh in the snow. He crouched low, tracing them with his hand. More than one rider. They had come close, then turned back. Watching, perhaps. Waiting. He returned to the cabin, carrying the weight of the discovery in his silence. May read it in his face before he spoke. They near, she whispered. Closer than I'd like, he admitted. She closed her eyes, whispering something in her language, a prayer or a plea. When she opened them, her voice was barely audible. If they come, I fight too. Jackson shook his head. You've fought enough. Her gaze hardened. No. If they take me, I die. Better to fight with you. For a long moment he studied her, the firelight painting her face with resolve. At last he nodded once, solemnly. Then we fight together. The words seemed to ease her. That night she sat nearer to him by the fire, her shoulder almost brushing his. Their silence was no longer born of fear, but of a pact unspoken, a trust sealed not with promises but with the weight of shared danger. Yet as dawn broke pale and cold, Jackson stepped outside and saw what he had dreaded, a thin curl of smoke rising beyond the ridge, where no settler should be this time of year. He stood long in the snow, his breath pluming, the valley quiet around him. Behind him, the cabin door creaked, and May's voice called softly, almost broken. Jackson! He turned, rifle in hand, the answer plain in his eyes before he spoke. They've found us. The smoke on the ridge did not vanish with the wind. It coiled upward, stubborn against the pale sky, a signal Jackson could not mistake. He stood in the snow with his rifle across his arm, the valley still around him, every pine bough heavy with frost. His breath smoked the air as he measured the distance, the angle. Whoever had built that fire had meant to be seen. His jaw tightened. Crane was close. Behind him, the cabin door creaked. May stepped onto the threshold, wrapped in his spare coat, her hair dark against the whiteness. Her voice was soft but certain. It is him. Jackson glanced back, eyes narrowing at the certainty in her tone. She didn't tremble as she said it. There was no need for guessing, she knew. Her past had found them. Stay inside, Jackson said, turning toward her. Her chin lifted, fragile but defiant. I stay with you. He stared at her, snow whispering down between them, and in her gaze he saw no retreat. He gave a single nod, then moved past her into the cabin, barring the door. The day slid slowly, like a weight pressing down. Jackson checked his rifle twice, set his knife on the table, stacked wood by the fire. May prepared food neither of them touched, her hands careful but her eyes distant. When he glanced at her, he saw the sheen of fear behind her composure, but also something fiercer, a will not to be broken again. Dusk came early, thick clouds smothering the light. The valley seemed to hold its breath. Then the sound arrived, hoofbeats, muffled by snow but unmistakable. One horse, then two, then three. They drew closer, the cadence deliberate, as though savoring the approach. May flinched, dropping the spoon she held. Jackson crossed to the window, pulling the curtain just enough to peer out. 3 riders moved through the trees, their outlines dark against the dim snow. The one in front rode tall, shoulders squared in arrogance Jackson recognized even from here. Crane. Jackson set the curtain back and looked at May. Her lips had parted, her breath shallow. "It is him," she whispered again, her hand curling tight on the table's edge. The hoofbeats stopped outside. Silence followed, heavy, before a voice rang clear, oily with mockery. "Boone, I know you're in there. Word is you found something that belongs to me." May's eyes widened, dread flashing through them. Jackson put a hand on her shoulder, grounding her. Then he crossed the cabin, unbarred the door, and stepped into the cold. Crane sat astride a bay horse, his beard wild, his coat lined with wolf fur. His eyes gleamed mean beneath the brim of his hat. 2 men flanked him, younger, rough around the edges, their rifles gleaming. Crane smiled when he saw Jackson. "That sack of bones you dragged in, she's mine," Crane drawled. "Ain't no use pretendin' otherwise. Best hand her over, for things get ugly." Jackson's rifle rested easy in his grip, but his voice was colder than the snow. "She's not yours." Crane chuckled, low and cruel. "You got a way of talkin' that don't suit you, Boone. Always thought you better than the rest, livin' up here with your books and your quiet. But you ain't different. You got something of mine, and I'll take it back." "She's no one's property," Jackson said. His tone was flat, final. The air cracked, silence breaking like glass. Crane's smile faltered, his eyes narrowing. One of the men shifted uneasily in his saddle. The horses snorted, their breath clouds in the frozen air. "Then I reckon we got ourselves a problem," Crane said, and his hand dropped to his pistol. Jackson fired first. The report shattered the stillness, echoing off the ridges. One of Crane's men toppled from his saddle, snow bursting around him. The horses reared, Crane cursing as his other man fumbled for his rifle. Jackson's second shot struck the ground near the man's boots, sending him scrambling, spurring his horse into retreat. That left Crane. He dismounted in fury, stomping through the snow toward the cabin, pistol raised. "You think you can take what's mine and walk away?" he bellowed. Jackson fired again, but Crane ducked behind a pine, the bullet splintering bark. Then he was rushing forward, pistol cracking. Jackson dropped to a knee, the round slicing the air above him. The cabin door flew open. May stood in the frame, eyes wide but burning. She clutched a length of wood pulled from the fire, its end glowing ember red. "Get back!" Jackson shouted, but she did not move. Crane saw her then, and his laugh split the night. "There she is. Thought you could run, girl? Thought some fool mountain man could keep you?" He lunged, seizing her by the arm, yanking her forward. May cried out, the ember log swinging wildly, striking his shoulder. He roared, staggering, the smell of singed fur rising from his coat. Jackson charged, slamming into him. The pistol clattered to the snow as the 2 men crashed together, grappling in the doorway. The fight was raw, brutal. Crane's fists hammered, his rage feral. Jackson answered with grim force, every blow fueled by nights of watching May tremble in her sleep, by the memory of the sack over her head. They rolled into the cabin, overturning the table, firelight flaring wild across the walls. Crane drew a knife, its blade flashing. Jackson caught his wrist, veins straining, the steel inching closer. May, trembling, seized the kettle from the fire and hurled its boiling contents. Crane screamed as the scalding water struck his face, his grip faltering. Jackson twisted, wrenching the knife free, then drove his shoulder hard into Crane's chest. The man crashed through the doorframe, sprawling in the snow. He lay there gasping, steam rising from his coat, his face contorted with fury. "You'll regret this, Boone," he rasped. Jackson stood in the doorway, rifle leveled. His voice was iron. "No, I won't." The shot was final. Crane's body jerked, then stilled, the snow beneath him stained dark. The valley swallowed the sound, leaving only the hiss of the wind. Silence settled, broken only by May's ragged breathing. She clutched the doorframe, eyes fixed on Crane's body, tears streaking her cheeks. Slowly, Jackson lowered the rifle. He turned to her, his chest heaving. She met his gaze, and for the first time since he'd found her in the snow, her expression was not only fear, it was release, the weight of chains finally cut. Her voice broke as she whispered, "It is over?" Jackson stepped closer, his hand brushing her trembling fingers. "It's over." She sagged then, not from weakness but from the burden of survival finally lifting. He caught her, drawing her against him. For a long moment they stood there, the firelight flickering behind them, the cold night pressing close, two lives bound together in the fragile stillness after violence. When at last she pulled back, her eyes were luminous with tears. "You risked all for me. Why?" Jackson searched her face, the scar along his jaw stark in the light. He had no poetry, no fine words, only truth. "Because I'll love you forever. I'll save you, always." Her lips parted, a sob escaping, but her hand rose to his cheek, resting there with reverence. In her eyes he saw the slow spark of trust, of something more than survival. The dawn came pale and cold, painting the snow in silver. They stepped outside together, side by side. Crane's body lay where it had fallen, already half buried by drifting flakes. Jackson glanced at it once, then turned away, guiding May forward. The world stretched wide before them, endless and harsh, yet no longer empty. Smoke curled from the cabin's chimney, rising into the clear sky. Their footprints pressed side by side into the snow, a trail leading not just back to shelter but toward a new beginning. And yet, as the wind shifted through the pines, Jackson paused, listening. The forest was quiet, but quiet in these mountains was never simple. He tightened his grip on May's hand, his gaze scanning the ridges where shadows pooled. He knew the West never left debts unpaid, that cruelty ran deep as roots. He looked at her, at the fragile hope in her eyes, and whispered so only she could hear, "We'll fight again if we must." The fire inside the cabin crackled, smoke rising higher, while the snow fell in silent sheets. The moment was fragile, beautiful, and unfinished, like a candle burning against the wind, daring it to blow.